Hi everyone, today we're going to be learning how to make an app that can have persistent data, or rather save and load data, even if you quit the app out of memory or restart your phone. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to create a brand new project here, single view app, and I'm going to call it, whatever. We're going to call it saving data app, and we're going to save it to the desktop. All right. So we've got our little app here, and we're just going to go ahead and start with the app. Now the first thing I want to do is I'm going to split this app, split my my screen here, so I could design the app a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this since I don't want to waste your time, but I'm just going to add a few things here. I'm going to add 2 text boxes here, so that's the first, and I'm going to set it to the width of the screen, and I'm going to add a button, and that's all we need here. Okay, I'm gonna rename the title of the button to save, and that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and start coding and understanding what happens here. I'm gonna delete this function as we're not gonna use it. Gonna delete this comment, just gonna clean things up here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a few things here. The first thing is I'm gonna create an outlet here, and I'm gonna call this string text field, because I'm gonna have a string in here, and I'm gonna save it. And here, even though this is a text field and always takes string, I'm gonna type int text field, and you'll see why in a second here. I'm just naming it whatever, because we're gonna put an integer here. Well, it's gonna be a text, and then we're gonna convert it to an integer, and that's essentially it. And I'm gonna have this button here, and we're gonna call it save button pressed, and this is obviously an action, and we're gonna put our code in here, and that's pretty much our design setup, and it's done. So essentially when we start, you're gonna put a name here, and you're gonna put a number here, and we're gonna save it. So how do we do that? Well, first we need to make variables to put the name and number in. So I'm gonna create this var my string of type string, and it's gonna be an empty string, and var my number of type int, and it has a value of 0 to begin with. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at what we're gonna do here. The first thing that you want to do is you want to create a variable that's going to store all your data. Okay, so I'm going to go var all my stored data. You could call this whatever you want, and we're going to make this of type UserDefaults dot standard. Okay, and that's it. So we've got this variable here, all my stored data, and it's of type UserDefaults dot standard. This makes it much easier to store multiple things at once. Okay, so now what we have to do is we're gonna have to go and create 2 functions, func save data, you could call it whatever you want here, and this will all be very clear once I'm done here. Load data. So we're gonna call up these 2 functions when we save and load our data. Okay, so what are we gonna write here? Okay, so the first thing is, what we want to do is we want to save data. So in our saved data, we're going to say, listen, take whatever text was in here, okay, and save it in my string, right? So my string variable. So my string, assign it a value of string text field dot text, and that's essentially it. And then we're going to say whatever's in here, give it store it in my number. Now of course this is sort of unsafe what I'm doing here, because there could very well be nothing in here and this app will crash, but I'm gonna assume that there is something here, so I'm gonna force unwrap it. You should really use an if let here, and I'm gonna go my number here. Obviously I'm not teaching you about optionals or being safe here, I'm just showing you how to have data persist. So my number equals int text field dot text, and of course since this is text and my number is of type int, we're going to have to do some conversions here. So we're going to convert this text to a number, and we're going to have to force unwrap this as well. Okay, so that's the first thing, and this still has nothing to do with persistent data, to be honest. So all we're doing is we're taking the inputs in these two text fields and we're storing them into these variables. Okay, so that should all be pretty standard. You guys should all know how to do this. Now we get to the storing part. So how do we save data into user default? So we go, remember that variable that we created, all my stored data? So we're going to call it up now. All my stored data dot set, and there's a whole bunch of sets. We're going to go value for any for key string. So the value, what value are we storing? We're storing the variable myString. Okay, and we have to give it a string key. You could call it anything. This is a key that will unlock the data, right? Because it's being saved. So I usually just put the word save and then the name of the variable, myString. Okay, so now we've saved the data in the variable myString. We're going to do the same thing again to the value of my number, and for the key, save my number, right? So now we've actually saved everything. We've saved it into UserDefaults. Just real quick, if you want to know what UserDefaults is, obviously I could go in depth here, but generally speaking, it's a .p list, and you see a few .p lists right here. Essentially, we're storing everything in a .p list, and as far as I could tell, I couldn't find any documentation that really says there's a limit to how much data you could store in the .p list. I think the limit is really your iPhone storage. So you could save a whole bunch of stuff here. Of course, this stuff is not encrypted, so it's not, you know, the safest way of saving data. That is important, but it's good enough if, you know, you're not creating a, you know, a bank app that, you know, saves very sensitive data. So right here, we've saved the data. That's all it takes, these two lines. We've saved the data. Now, how do we load the data? How do we load the data? So now you have to use an if let, and I'll walk you through what this means. Initially, it kind of looks a little complicated, but really it isn't. So we're going to go if let, and then we have to create a variable here, a constant variable, right? Hence the let. I usually use the word load and the name of the variable that I'm going to load up. So myString, load myString, right? So I just created this variable, and it's gonna have a type of string, because obviously myString is of type string. And we're gonna go equals UserDefaults dot standard dot value for key. And for the key, it says, okay, so you're trying to load something. What is the key that what is the key of this data that you're trying to load? So we have to copy this, and it has to be identical, case sensitive, by the way. Okay, so that's that. And then we have to typecast it. So I'm typecasting it, and you need to specify the type that it is. So we know the data in there is of type string, so we have to go typecast it as string, and we open the curly brace and have a close curly brace. And here what we do is, let me just go ahead and make this a bit bigger so you guys could see. What we do here is we say, listen, take my string and assign it a value of load my string. So you'll see what this looks like in a sec here. So let's go ahead and explain what this is. So essentially I'm saying, listen, if this thing is not empty, go ahead and create this variable called load my string, which is of type string. And if this thing is not empty, take the value for this key, whatever the value is stored in here, take it and store it in load my string. And then take load my string and store it in my string, which now will update the value. Okay, so we've done that for my string, and we're gonna have to do it again for my number. So I'm gonna go load my number of type int, because it holds an int, equals UserDefaults dot standard dot value for key, and we're gonna have to copy this key identically, and we're gonna have to typecast it as int because it holds an int, open and close curly braces, and we're gonna go my number equals load my number. And we're pretty much done here. This app should work now. Of course, under save button, we're gonna call up the save data function, which is this thing right here. And under view.load, we're gonna call up the load function, load data function. And we're pretty much done here, to be honest. Let's go ahead and give this a try and see if it works. Gonna change this to iPhone 8 and we're gonna go ahead and run. Okay, so this is the app that shows up. Let's go ahead and put some data in here. So I'm gonna put a name here for the sake of logic, and we're gonna put how many subscribers I have. I think I have 150. Now watch this. I'm not gonna click save. If I just click here and relaunch it, it automatically shows the same data. That's because the view is still loaded in memory. But as soon as I quit, and this is always tricky, double clicking, and I quit this out of memory and I run this again, it's empty. So we're gonna try this again, except this time we're gonna press save for the sake of logic, and 150 subscribers. And now we're gonna press save. And now we're gonna quit this out of memory and we're gonna launch it again. It doesn't work. Let's see why that is. So I've saved the data. The data is fully saved in here. And we've loaded the data, of course. So we've loaded the data. The data is loaded. This works, but I have to say to put the data in the text boxes. Silly me. So I totally forgot about this. So we're gonna go and put the data here. So you always forget something, right? So string text field dot text, assign it the value of my string, and int text field dot text, assign it a value of string my number. So we're taking whatever my number is, converting it to string. This should work. Let's go ahead and launch it again. Let's give this a try. So we're gonna try this again for the sake of logic, and 150 subscribers. We press save. We're gonna quit this out of memory. Just give it a second. This is always so tricky to do. And we're gonna launch it. And did I press save? I don't think I did. For the sake of logic, because this should work. If it doesn't, I'm not sure why. Gonna go 150. We're gonna press save, and let's give this another try. Still doesn't work. What am I doing here that's wrong? Of course, I put this in the save button press, which is silly. This needs to be in view.load. So we load the data, then we put it in. I put in the wrong function. Let me go ahead and clean this. Just take away the empty spaces here. This, I'm pretty sure, will work. All right, let's give this another try here. So there we go, it actually worked. But here, I'll illustrate again. If I double click, I quit, I launch, it's there. If I put 2 here and I put 1500 subscribers, because we'll get there, I press save, I quit. Just give me a second. This is always tricky to do. I launch this. Obviously it says the updated stuff. If I change this and I put some other number here, I press save and I quit, and I launch it. It works perfectly. Now watch. If I don't press save, okay, right? If I don't press save and I quit and I launch this again, it's gonna go back to the last time I saved. See how that works? And that's pretty much what you have to do. So let me go through the code again. Created 2 variables for the text fields. We've created 2 variables that hold the data here. Created all my stored data, which is of type UserDefaults, that's standard. And essentially in these two functions, we're saving the values in here into the two variables, and then we're saving them in all my stored data. We're loading them using an if let, and essentially we're calling up the save data function when we press this button. And in the view.load, we're always, first thing we're doing, loading the data that's been saved, and we're setting the data to these two fields. Now, one last note, because this is part one of two parts of this video. You could use this method to save data of type string, of type int, of type collection, which is arrays and dictionaries, although dictionaries are very finicky, and of type bool. If you wanted to save any other type of data, for example, a type UI image or some other data, or a dictionary, I've had a lot of trouble with where the keys and values are not in the order of the default order, your app will crash. So if you want to save more complex data, or data that is not of those types, string, int, bool, array, watch part 2. And essentially it's the same thing here, but we add one more thing to make it work, otherwise it'll crash. So if you want to see how to do that using NS Archiver and NS Unarchiver, go ahead and watch part 2. Thank you for watching.